Okay, great. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is the first class of 5 sessions we're going to do on this course that is called Heart Advice for Death and Dying. This is a course that is a little bit more introductory in some ways, but it also still goes into death and the Tibetan Buddhist teachings on death in quite a bit more detail as well. So again, a lot of us have been around Tibetan Buddhism and the subject of death somewhat, so this will be a nice way to revisit that for those of you who are already familiar, and for those of you who are new, a chance to kind of introduce the teachings on death and dying in this tradition. So to get things started, as usual, we're going to have some prayers. And so Jana, I think, will be kind enough to lead us in doing those prayers.
Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times in English. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Siddhartha, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Siddhartha, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Short mandala offering, once in English. This is round and anointed with perfume, streaming with flowers, to adorn the mountain roof 4 continents of sun and moon. I imagine this as a field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Radhavantala Kandira. Refuge in bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go to refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Supreme Assembly, by the merits I create through listening to the Dharma. May I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodam Choji Shognam La, Janju Vardu Dharmi Kyam Suchi, Daji Trillian Jake Sonamji. Drola Menshir Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chodam Choji Chodnam La, Janju Vardu Dharmi Kyam Suchi, Daji Trillian Jake Sonamji. Drola Menshir Sangye Drupar Sho.
Okay, thank you, Jana. Thank you all for the prayers. And we normally do a little meditation here before I begin the teaching, but I think tonight we're going to skip the meditation and just maybe sit in silence for just a moment to reflect on our motivation for being here. I think we'll got a lot to do tonight, so I think it's better not to do a formal meditation, but at least a brief reflection on our purpose for being here. And as we know in the Buddha's teachings, we can accomplish a lot. We can certainly even have some effects on this life, having greater peace of mind, not feeling quite so kind of disconnected from things or stressful, anxious. All of these things can be alleviated to some degree by our Buddhist practice. Just to gain some benefit for this life alone is really not even Dharma practice. Our Dharma practice begins when we think of things beyond this life. Our next rebirth, liberation, our own freedom from the round of existence, samsara, as well as the ultimate goal, the goal of Buddhahood, enlightenment. Ideally, this is the motivation we want to bring to these teachings. We're going to be investigating this topic of death and dying, particularly to see the reality of death and its implications for ourselves. And that's how we always start in Buddhism, is the teachings are meant to be applied initially to ourselves and our own situation. But then, of course, we universalize that by recognizing that the predicament that we find ourselves in, having this human life that will come to an end, and so on, all the teachings we'll be looking at, this is the same for every being. Beings who are born will die. They have to, again, deal with that reality. And of course, we want to be here for the sake of those beings, to help them to make the best possible use of the lives that they have, and to eventually be able to kind of overcome death, to achieve the deathless state of peace, nirvana, and moreover to attain Buddhahood enlightenment. So generate that Mahayana motivation of bodhicitta, wishing to do the work on yourself in confronting this topic of death and dying, so you can overcome all obscurations, everything that keeps you from realizing your full potential, becoming a Buddha, and then being able to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, good enough.
Excuse me,
So,
Dad,
yes, sir.
mic on.
It is. Can you not hear me?
It's not very.
Let me go see if I can get the volume up.
I know, I know, I'm playing a
It might
part
be
in this.
where the
I'm
microphone
getting
is.
hearing aids next week, so
Okay.
I am.
All right. Is that better? Is that better?
That's right.
That's better? Okay, good. Yeah. I can tell
Thank
that
you.
the volume's up a bit more now, all right. So, okay, so let's go ahead, and I just want to introduce you to what this course is going to be about. In terms of sharing, there are some documents that you'll find out on the website. John has kindly put the link out there. I might just show this to you so that you know. If you go to Siddhikarma's website, you'll see that at the right now for these two teachings in May on Thursdays, tonight and next week, there's a little thing that says by clicking here. If you click on that, you go to a nice little Google Drive, and you can find some of the documents that I'm going to be referring to. The very first one that I want to talk about just is the course outline. Let me make that much larger so that we can actually see what's on the screen. This is what we're going to be working with over these 5 sessions, and this is going to be a continuous 5 sessions and taking us into June. As I said, this is a bit of an introductory course, but depending upon who's in the room, I can always gear the discussion to a bit more advanced teachings. But tonight, the real agenda is kind of to get ourselves to start to work with the topic of death. We talk a little bit about death and rebirth in Tibetan Buddhism. And again, most of you have some idea of that, but we'll go over that in brief. And then to begin the process of kind of developing a deeper awareness of death through using the first of the set of contemplations that are part of the death awareness meditation, what's often referred to as the 9-point death meditation. We're going to go through the kind of details on that, and that's kind of an interesting place to start, kind of getting our heads around the reality of death for ourselves. We're going to continue with that process of the death awareness meditation with the second set of meditations next week on the uncertainty of the time of death. Going to look about how we work with disturbing emotions around death and dying, how we make sure we have a practice to kind of tidy up our karma with purification so that when we get to the end of this life, we're not plagued by all of that. In June, we'll start kind of talking a bit more about how we prepare for death. And this will be kind of focused around that third set of contemplations that have to do with at the time of death, what will be most important. And we'll talk a bit about spiritual preparation for death. In the 4th session, we're going to actually go through the death process as it's taught, primarily coming from the Tantric tradition, from the Tibetan Book of the Dead that's based on the Guhya Garbha Tantra. And these Tantric teachings give us the description of what actually happens at death. So you always say nobody knows what happens at death. Well, it seems that the Buddha does. And so the Buddha gave us these teachings so we can prepare accordingly and know what's going to transpire as we go into death, into the intermediate state, the bardo, and then being reborn. The last session is where we will talk about kind of spiritual support for those who are dying, and once people have died, talk a bit about Tonglen, which is a wonderful practice to carry us through all this work of our own death, as well as working with others who are dying, and then even touch on some of the practical considerations to prepare for death. Many of us don't take the time to prepare in terms of, giving some sort of advanced directive about what we want done or not done in terms of our own care, those sorts of things. We're going to go into that as part of this course, because while we're talking about death and dying, those practical things are worth taking a look at. So that's what we're going to be covering in terms of this course. While I'm in this folder, I might introduce you to kind of the little thing with the readings. This course is offered with a certificate that people can obtain for completing it. I don't know if people are interested in doing that. That's really up to you. If you want to do that, let me know. If so, there is a little book that goes with this that has the same title as the course, Heart Advice for Death and Dying. And you can obtain it. It was originally published in hardbound like this, but essentially it's now in a PDF file as well as an ebook file. And you can obtain it and read along with it if you'd like. I will be assigning some meditations, and the meditations are available on the drive that you can work with over the next week, the week between each of these sessions, and the following one. And so I've kind of put that assignment together in terms of what meditations will go with each week. And I'll talk about those meditations as we go through. The course itself also has some recommended reading that are books that are, some of them I think better than others. The very first one on the list is the one that I would really recommend if you haven't read it. If you're curious about this topic of death and dying, and particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, Mind of Clear Light by His Holiness, together with Jeffrey Hopkins. It's got wonderful teachings and goes into the death process in a lot more detail. The rest of what's on here, I'm not going to really talk about. I put together my own supplemental reading list that these are just books that you might find of interest as you pursue this topic. Again, the Heart Advice for Death and Dying, that's a part of this course. That's the link that you would go to be able to obtain that book. There's also some practices that go with it if you're curious about those. There's also this wonderful book that is, this was originally published as this kind of Bible-looking book. Let me take it off screen for showing it online as well. Some of you are familiar with this book called How to Enjoy Death. Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teachings on death and dying. And they put it together in this thing that looks like a Bible. It's got the gold, what do they call it? Kind of the gold pages on the outside. And I always thought it would be very interesting to go around to hotels and leave this. That's the Gideon Bible. And then it would give people a choice. Am I going to read the Gideon Bible or am I going to read How to Enjoy Death?
Enjoy death.
This has been republished as a book that I've already made available on the drive. So you can actually do the kind of pull it up there. Let me pull back up the title of it when it was published as kind of a free PDF was How to Face Death Without Fear. And so again, that is, or how to help your loved ones enjoy death. Anyway, this is, you can find it through this link, but as I said, I've already put it out there on the drive as well. And it's got some nice teachings from Rinpoche around death and dying. There's also some books that I find really useful from other Buddhist traditions. Joan Halifax Roshi, who runs Upaya Center in Santa Fe, she's written a wonderful book called Being with Dying that's based on the program that they conduct there. Frank Ostaszewski, who also teaches frequently at Upaya, he's from the Bay Area. He's done a lot of work with Zen Hospice, and he's got an interesting book called The 5 Invitations, Discovering What Death Can Teach Us About Living Fully. And there's a few other books on there, but I've just put together my own list. I think I have more books on death and dying than any other topic in Buddhist literature. So I also put some books out there on caring for the dying. If that is a position that you're in, that you're wanting some support from a Tibetan Buddhist point of view, in particular, bereavement even, grief and dealing with loss in your life, burial options, some things I may touch on again at the end of this course, and other practical considerations. There are some books out there that are kind of useful around working with the reality of death and how we prepare in ordinary ways for that as well. Again, the meditations you will find under each individual session. So for this week, there are 2 meditations I'm going to be encouraging you to work with. The first one on impermanence, which I'll talk about shortly. The second one on the inevitability of death, which is, again, the first part of those meditations on death awareness. So again, I'll give more detail on all of that as we go through this tonight. So this first topic that we're going to talk about, I've got a little slideshow that's mostly about keeping me on track. It's really not serving that much purpose. Occasionally has some of the points I'm talking about. But these are the 3 things we're going to kind of go into tonight that I just introduced you to on the outline for this course, approaching the topic of death, kind of getting our heads around this reality that is something that we often don't talk about. In Tibetan Buddhism, much more so than others, but then go into, again, death and rebirth in Buddhism, and then that first set of meditations on death awareness. So I want to start by talking about what we often see as kind of the common attitudes towards death. And there are many attitudes you could obviously have around death in the world, but that they tend to lump into 2 main things if people are not approaching death in a healthy way. One is to have fear of it so that you don't want to talk about it at all, right? You're like, thank you very much. Death is not something I really wanted to get into. You go to a cocktail party and people start talking about death,
Exactly.
thank you, I'm out of here. Don't want anything to do with that. People have a lot of trepidation and fear about death, a lot of apprehension about approaching that issue in terms of their own mortality. Obviously, when it comes to those around them and facing and confronting the death of individuals that they know and what have you, that can be even more challenging. But this is not a very healthy attitude, right? Because if we just have this fear blocking us from working with this, we're shutting out something that is a part of our lives, that is guaranteed to happen. Your death is more guaranteed than any vacation you're planning, right? You may not get to your vacation, but your death is definitely going to happen. So that attitude of fear is one of the problematic states of mind that keeps us from really working with death in a healthy way. The other one is the way that people become very sort of flippant and not really care about, like, oh, death, I'll deal with death when I get there. Of course, there's some logic to that, right? Because we sometimes live our lives with that. Well, I'll confront this problem or this situation when it happens. Why should I worry about it now? But with death, this is something, again, that we know is going to happen to us. That's the main topic we're going to be focusing on tonight, the inevitability of our death. So if that is the reality, why be flippant about it when we know that we can actually do things to prepare for death? We can be ready for death when it happens, and we can confront it with certainly no fear. We can confront it even with maybe some anticipation about what death might be like. This is, again, from a Tibetan Buddhist point of view, death is actually something that ideally we should look forward to. It's an amazing spiritual opportunity if we have the wherewithal to use it in that way. So these 2 common attitudes are problematic, and they don't really help us to confront the reality of this situation that, again, we all have to face. So in terms of that, one of the things that I want to do with tonight is to really get us into kind of confronting the reality of our own death. Before we do this little exercise, I do want to share, actually should have shared this before putting it on the screen. This might freak people out already. We're going to talk about how do you want to die. But this is from Joan Halifax Roshi's book, and they do, again, this entire program at Upaya. I have not had the fortune of going through it. It's primarily for people in medical occupations who are working with those who are dying. But nonetheless, people who are spiritual support during the time of death are also invited to attend. But in her book, towards the beginning, in this section where she introduces this exercise comes from her. So it's not something that I've designed myself. I'm giving her full credit for it. She begins the section by talking about relating a story. She says, a few years ago, a dying friend read me some lines from the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. They made me smile. Virtuous King Yudhisthira, who is the son of Yama, the Lord of Death. Yama is kind of the personification of death in Hinduism and Buddhism. It's not a real being. It's just that the way that we would refer to death as the Lord of Death, this being that, is responsible for the lives ending of beings and what have you. So King Yudhisthira, is asked, what is the most wondrous thing in the world? And Yudhisthira replies, the most wondrous thing in the world is that all around us people can be dying and we don't believe it can happen to us. And this is really true. Look at during the pandemic, we had a lot more death in our lives, at least seeing it around. Some of you may have come much closer to death in terms of people who died from the pandemic and what have you, or maybe even were dealing with your own situation of having COVID and the fear of death that came with that and so on, especially in those early days of the pandemic. But, we still have this denial around it a lot, right? People not thinking, oh, well, that's not going to happen to me, though. I'm not going to get the virus. I'm not going to die. Yeah, Anne-Marie.
I just heard recently that people who have near-death experiences are not afraid of death. Have
Yes.
you heard of that?
Yes, we've heard that definitely. And we're going to maybe touch on this idea of near-death experiences here and there. I have heard differing things about, the experience of that, but in general, people come away from it with a diminishment of their fear. They don't have any fear of death anymore because most of them have a relatively good experience. Now, in Tibetan Buddhism, it said that not everyone has a good experience when they go into the death process, though, because it really depends upon the state of mind that you bring into that, as well as the karma you've created. All these things we're going to be touching on a little bit tonight and throughout the course. So to get our heads to kind of confront our own death, we're going to do this little exercise called How Do You Want to Die? I have some pens and little cards that you're welcome to write on. It's going to be a writing exercise and then a chance to discuss things. So you can, pass those around at home. You can find a piece of paper, or if you want to type it in your computer or whatever, you can do that. But you don't need a huge amount of paper or anything, but you can take a couple of these cards if you think you might write a little bit more. There's going to be essentially 3 questions that are going to be a part of this. And what I'm going to encourage you to do is to kind of take a moment to think about the question and then to kind of write down what your answers, your responses are to that. And then we'll go on to the next question, and then we'll complete with the third question. And after we've gone through all 3, I would like people to pair up and discuss this a little bit, just like 5 minutes each, so that you can share this with another if you're comfortable doing so. If what you've written down is something you don't feel that comfortable about, then you can talk about the experience of going through that, right? You can still talk about it without sharing that information. You'll see when we get to that, actually. So again, let's see, the paper and pens are still going around. If you don't have one, please be sure to take one so that you can engage in this if you wish. Yes. It's an optional exercise. I'm not, demanding anybody do anything tonight. This is really just a way to kind of begin that process of looking at our own mortality, looking at our own death. All right. So I think the questions will be pretty self-evident, but let's go ahead and put them on the screen. And again, I'll give you a few minutes to work with each of these and maybe just kind of look up when you're done, writing or what have you, so that I have an idea, whether everyone has completed. Mm-hmm. First, write down your thoughts on the following. You can just leave them there. That's fine. Thank you, Roland. This is the first question. What is your worst case scenario of how you will die? And it says there, be as specific as possible. If you can, talk about well, how would I be dying? When would it be? Of what? What are the causes of death? With whom? Who would be there? Where would I be? I mean, if you're thinking about kind of the worst possible situation, it's really to confront that, again, we don't have much control over our death, but what would it look like if it was the worst case scenario? And then, of course, after you've written down that, you might sit quietly and ask yourself how you feel, how your body feels, what's coming up for you emotionally, mentally, looking at that question. All right, so just take some time in silence to do that, to answer that question.
Is that 2 questions or 1?
It's 1. What is your worst case scenario of how you will die? And as it says there, once you've written down your answer, you just check in. How does your body feel? And what emotions might be rising for you at this time? And just take note. You don't have to write that down if you wish, just mental observation. Okay, so those who are still writing, maybe just take another 30 seconds or so to wrap up what your thoughts are on your worst case scenario, what that looks like. All right. So the next question might be a little easier to entertain. How do you really want to die? What is maybe the ideal circumstances where you would be facing death? As with the first question, again, be as specific as possible. Where are you? Who is there with you? How are you dying? What are you dying of? The causes of death. And then once more, after you've written down that, your ideal way, how you really want to die, again, what is happening in your body and mind? Check in. You don't have to write that down. Just do a mental observation of what's occurring right now as you entertain this concept of your best case scenario, how you really want to die. be sure to sort of check in, do that mental observation of what's going on for you, having answered that question. You don't need to write that down, just check in. Again, if you're still writing, maybe about another 30 seconds or so, and wrap up what you wanted to share in regard to that question. How do you really want to die? And we have a last question, final question. What are you willing to do to die the way you want to die? In other words, to what extent we prepare for so many things, right? We prepare for a vacation. We put a lot of time and energy into researching where we want to go, what I want. To what extent are you willing to engage in things that will help you to have the type of death you'd like to have? And not that we have complete control over that, but we can do what we can to have some control over what factors we can. And what are you willing to do? Maybe this isn't a long answer, but kind of just opening ourselves up for that possibility of how we might use this time we have together and our time even outside of class to work with the idea of our own death, our own mortality. If it helps, Joan Halifax, where she says, please ask yourself what you are doing to prepare for the possibility of a sane and gentle death, something that will be ideal for you. What are you willing to do to prepare for that? Okay, again, just take some time to wrap up your answer to that. And as I mentioned, what I think is useful, I know it's kind of tight in the room here. If somebody wants to go outside, it's a little windy, but you could, do that. We're going to take just like 10 minutes, 5 minutes each to talk about what this was like for you, or if you want to share what's on your piece of paper, you're welcome to do that. But the other person can just simply sit and be an observer and take that in of what that other person's sharing about their worst case scenario, their best case scenario, and then, of course, what they might be willing to do to prepare for that. And then you switch roles and have the other person share. And if you've got time, maybe just a little bit at the end of any feedback you want to give to each other in regard to that. But it's an interesting exercise to hear what goes on for people in terms of these ideas around death, their own death. So everyone clear about that? But how many people do we have in the call? Do we have an even number? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We've got 10 here. Maybe I'll go online with Mary Jo, so she has someone that she can share with. And I'll get my headphones so that it's easier for me to listen to her. And we'll turn off the microphone here so that we're not getting all that in Mary Jo's ear as well. So, all right, so I'll be turning off this microphone and that microphone. This is Mary Jo Furco.
Yeah. Mary Jo's here. There's another
Mary Jo Furco.
I was going to say,
there's another Mary
came in.
Oh, there are two. I didn't know that.
I'm gonna sit back on the couch, so. That's where I was.
Do you guys converse with it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, how do we?
Okay, so you can begin now. Just break into groups of two.
This is actually kind of humorous for me.
Hi,
because
Don.
I just.
Hello.
How are you?
Let me put this in here.
So, my worst case scenario. It's it's like that. Where just nobody knows.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, a little bit.
One thing we have to do is turn your we have to turn off the TV here because it's picking up you on the TV. So let me do that.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I just love that. Oh, yeah. I think of that. I remember the one that just kind of where the person Eric had it came in and with the fire truck. And I don't know. It was actually on his
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Can you hear me still there?
Yes. Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Okay. I think it's still coming through John's computer or something, but anyway.
Well, I can understand that.
Okay. Well, we'll just do the best we can, I guess.
We
Yeah.
actually have another Zoom user on board. Oh, it's Laura. Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Laura.
Ah.
But
Hi.
yeah, what we're doing is we're doing a little discussion of an exercise that we just did. It's still coming in really loud here. Are you hearing more than just me talking?
A little bit.
Okay.
So everything.
Yeah. Why don't you go ahead and share what you had, Mary Jo, in terms of
Oh,
these?
okay. Well, the worst case scenario is two things for me. Is my husband crying and
You want us to pass the thing around and give you your pens back?
We can do that during the break. Let's go ahead with what we want to deal with next, which I just want to open up for maybe one or two comments. We've all had an opportunity to talk about this with another person. So again, you've got some kind of way of digesting a bit of what we went through, but is there anybody who wants to talk any further about what this was like to do this exercise or anything that was insightful in doing the discussion with another person?
Well, I have to say, I was talking to Jen and we had the best laugh.
Having laughs about death.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes humor does help. Yes, Roland. Thanks, Emery.
It was interesting to hear somebody else's answers to those questions and be able to relate, like, oh, I've had that thought too. Like drowning came up. The experience of drowning, and that's something that I've contemplated about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is quite interesting what people have as their perspectives. And as you said, Roland, sometimes we go, oh, yeah, I've had that thought too. That didn't come to mind. Or maybe we were writing it down. But
Yeah.
like for me, the one that I see as like the worst case, mainly because I don't think I'd have much control over my mind, is a violent death. You know, where you have someone killing you on the street or something. You know, and that is a challenge. You know, how when you're confronting with something like that. But then like the ideal death, I remember my mother's ideal death, she really wanted to die in her sleep. I mean, with no conscious awareness of death happening, you know, just like go out. And, you know, in Buddhist terms, maybe that's not really the ideal way to go because we don't have a lot of control then over what might be happening in our minds. But we'll talk about that as we go through the course. So anyone else? Just maybe one more comment on what this was like to do this exercise or anything you learned from your discussion with another person. Yeah, Mary Jo.
I don't know if this is the right appropriate time or not, but you know, when Pemene was here, we did some work as a sangha or as a group, let's say. And at one point talked about having a little file box and folders with our wishes and so forth. I don't know if that ever materialized. I don't remember.
I don't know
But
that
of course, it would be
Mhm.
unusual if that were useful. But I mean, because it's likely maybe you're on the plane or the train or whatever, I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
still, I do like that idea,
Mhm.
and I don't know if it ever even partly materialized.
We can touch on that at the end when we do talk about advanced directives and things like that, because the reason to have all those, of course, is we don't know what's going to happen, but if it is looking like a particular scenario, it's good to have it spelled out, what all you want, what your wishes are, and so on. So yeah, we'll definitely revisit that if the center wants to,
Well, Pamene was a death doula. Of course, that's all. And since she left, that of course is no longer viable. But she was going to help us carry, we had a liberation box, remember?
Right,
And she was going to make sure that we had a proper Tibetan goodbye. But of course, now that she's gone, that's kind of.
It can still be recreated. We'll talk about that,
yeah, okay.
As part of this course towards the end.
One thing that came up between Stella and me is creating, I would call it a death box, but having, like, there were prayers that she wanted to be able to recite at the end and having them easy to hand so that either she could read it or somebody could read it to her. And Jen and I have been talking about, well, what if we wake up one day and one of us is dead? What do we do? And I don't have a clue.
We'll talk about that as part of the course as well. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Ed?
No.
Wasn't sure. Okay, I wasn't sure. Yeah, one more comment and then we need to go on with the material.
Eloise mentioned to me that there's a trend now starting or some places where people are having a big celebration before they die, and that people you can have a chance to visit and have closure or that kind of thing, but sort of a big party, really. And so that's something that I hadn't heard of.
Celebration of life while you're still alive.
Yeah.
Rather than waiting till you can't attend.
All right.
So again, all of these are wonderful ideas, and we'll touch on a lot of this stuff as we go through this course. What I want to do is talk a little bit again about death and rebirth in Buddhism. Though most of us have some teachings around this, it's just worthwhile to spend a little time focusing on that. And this informs them, perhaps to some degree, what our ideal death might look like or what we might be preparing for. If we have the understanding of what happens at death in a general way and what rebirth is all about, well, then we have some sort of context for why we need to pay attention to what type of death we're going to have. First of all, of course, in Buddhism, death is a natural, inevitable part of life. As they often say, if you don't want to die, don't get born. Everything that is born, everyone that is born eventually dies. That's kind of couched within this idea of impermanence. Impermanence is one of the biggest teachings that the Buddha gave. In fact, it was his final teaching as well, as he showed that aspect of passing from this life. He was an enlightened being, so it's not like he's really dying. He's in that sort of eternal state of complete enlightenment, but he showed that aspect, and his last words were around impermanence and the fact that everything is constantly changing. This is what we mean by subtle impermanence, that there is this anything that arises from causes and conditions has momentary change involved in it. Nothing stays the same for a single moment. And within that is the idea of gross impermanence. Gross impermanence, of course, is referring to the fact that many things that come into existence do go out of existence. This life being one of them. Not everything that is impermanent has gross impermanence. And by the way, impermanent and permanent, these two terms don't have the same meaning in Buddhism as we often use in our culture, right? We think permanent means eternal, and impermanent means it doesn't last. Well, there are actually some things that are impermanent that do last. For example, your mind. We're going to talk about mind shortly. Mind is a phenomenon that never ends. There is no end to it. There is no beginning to it. So we do see that this idea of how we think about permanence and impermanence in our culture is maybe a little bit different than Buddhism. But we mean, again, is this changing moment by moment. Once something comes into existence, it is already imbued with that change, constantly moving in that direction. Look at the bodies we have, which again is a big part of this life, right? This is how we see ourselves as an embodied being. We have the consciousness together with this body. Our bodies are changing all the time. The two cells that came together in the womb that are the beginning of this body that you still possess are way gone, right? Those are not even in existence anymore. You know, those cells duplicated, replicated, this whole process of multiplication that became the fetus, that became the baby, that became the toddler, that became the child, that became the teenager, that became the young adult, and so on. It's all in a process of continual change. This body has not stayed, unchanging for even a second. The meditation that kind of goes with this that you're welcome to explore, let me go ahead and put that on the screen. It's this meditation, well, actually I have to pull that up on the drive, which I had up earlier. So when we go to session 1, you'll see that there's this meditation on impermanence. Again, I'll make this a bit larger. It's kind of a nice meditation because it goes through the whole idea of starting with those things that are physical, beginning with our body, the changes that are taking place in our body every moment. Then, of course, we go down to our minds. Our minds are also impermanent phenomena. Think about how frequently our minds are changing. Constantly new things appearing to our minds, new perceptions, new thoughts that we're having, what have you. And then, of course, the world around us. Impermanence, of the outer world. Everything around us constantly changing. Now, why we reflect on impermanence is to come to know that reality, that all of this is going on, but moreover, because we have a lot of clinging to the opposite. We like to cling to things as if they're unchanging, as if you can get it to hold still. I mean, so much of our energy, and most beings in this world, they put a lot of energy into getting kind of all the pieces of their life into place. So I got the perfect partner and the perfect job with the perfect home and the perfect pets and the perfect this and the perfect that. And if I can just keep it all in place perfectly, then I'll win or something, somehow I'll be able to relax. Well, we know this is an illusion, right? Because everything is constantly changing in gross ways when beings go out of existence and in subtler ways when things are changing moment by moment. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Take care.
Thank you. I
See
should
you.
go leave.
No
Bye.
problems. Okay, so impermanence is a reality. It's something that we do have to get our heads around. Within that idea of gross impermanence, though, is the fact that every existence that we've had, and Buddha says we've had countless of them, because everything revolves around mind. Mind is the thread that goes through all of these existences. We have our own continuity of awareness, consciousness, mind. These are all said to be synonymous terms. That is a non-material phenomenon in Buddhism. I know in current Western scientific thinking, they still hold to some materialist view of consciousness, that consciousness is what arises when all of this physical stuff in our brains and so on is being activated through electrical, chemical impulses and what have you. And that's why we have consciousness. So when all of that ends, consciousness ends. In Buddhist terms, consciousness has its own continuity, and it will continue beyond this life, and it has existed before this life. This is what we mean by rebirth, is that at the end of every life, there will be a process we go through, and we'll talk about that in the 4th session of this course, whereby the consciousness eventually separates from this body. And that's what we mean by true death, is when consciousness leaves this body, and it links up then with another existence on the basis of karma, the actions that we've engaged in that have planted seeds for our future existence. So that's the context for what we are working with this concept that we call death. Death is really just a passage of going through the kind of departure from this life into then again a sort of holding intermediate state where we then take rebirth in another existence. Something we've done countless times. It's something we need to be somewhat prepared for if we want to have, again, that more ideal way of death happening, as well as what rebirth we are going to take. So impermanence, again, is kind of the idea behind that, but death is essentially when the mind separates from the body. Yeah, Eloise, did you want to?
Lama, she had a wonderful saying that he'd say, "You Westerners, you think nothing of going and staying in a motel one night and staying in another motel the next night, and a hotel and the next night." He said, "That's just life. That's what we're doing. So
Exactly.
You're just gonna die and take another body. You're gonna die and take another body. No difference."
Yeah, the text I'm going to teach later.
Yeah, but
this
some of the
summer.
motels are pretty seedy.
The text I'm going to teach later this summer for all of you, as well as down in Santa Fe, is the 37 Practices of a Bodhisattva. And there's a verse in there where it talks about the guest of the consciousness leaving the guest house of the body. It's really just a guest house. You're just kind of hanging out there for a while. You know, we get really attached to it. We do a lot of things to kind of make it our own and what have you, but we
Is that
can't stay there.
the Rumi poem, The Guest House?
No, it's not the same
Okay.
thing. But yeah, the guest house is a nice poem, but this is an allusion to a similar concept. But so the one thing to keep in mind with Buddhism, and that we all, I'm sure most of us are familiar with this concept, it is of course possible to become free of death and to be free of rebirth. The state of samsara, which we often refer to as cyclic existence, where we are going from life to life through the force of our karma, which is driven by our states of mind, our afflictions, and so on. We're going to get into this more next week. But the idea is that this process of samsara, cycling from life to life, can come to an end without a doubt. That's the promise of the Buddha's teachings. We can attain our own liberation, that we often refer to frequently as just simply nirvana. Nirvana is the pacification of these factors so that you no longer have to take rebirth. And you can even go beyond that to attain enlightenment, Buddhahood, where you have removed even subtler obscurations in the mind that allow you to continue to be intimately involved with the lives of beings who are still in samsara, to help them to attain their peace and to eventually attain their Buddhahood. So this is, again, the promise of Buddha's teachings, that we do have the ability to, use our awareness of death to create amazing spiritual progress towards accomplishing those goals. And one of the last things I want to say around kind of this idea of death and rebirth in Buddhism, why do we need to work with this? Why are we spending 5 sessions on Thursday nights looking at this topic? It's important to accept and be aware of death for 2 main reasons. One, we will be more likely to use this life wisely. If we are really conscious and aware of the reality of this life coming to an end, then we make better decisions about what we do with the time that we have. Anne-Marie was talking about people who come back from a near-death experience and are often they hold things much more preciously in their life, right? Because they've seen the reality of that, sort of what that departure might look like and the implications that it has for living one's life, quite fully. We have that phrase even in Latin, right, of carpe diem, but in Buddhism, carpe diem means seize the day to do your practice, to actually work on your mind, to engage in spiritual practice that will be useful. The other idea there that's on the screen is that we will put energy into doing what will enable us to be prepared for death. Because death is, I don't want to make it sound really like an insignificant moment, but I don't want to make it sound too significant either, but it is an important moment. It's a doorway through which we will go on then to our next existence. And we will have, if we're really advanced in our practice, even the opportunity to attain great spiritual realizations through death. Something we're going to talk about in this course as well. So it is important that we have some sort of healthy regard for death and prepare accordingly, so that when death comes, because next week we're going to look at the meditation on the uncertainty of the time of death, it could happen today. It could happen on your way home tonight. We have no idea when death is going to come, right? When it comes, you will be prepared. You'll be ready. You'll have the wherewithal to say, oh, this is the moment. This is what's going on. This is the time I need to, again, bring some composure to my mind, some good thoughts, some positive, virtuous thoughts. Because it is said that how we die greatly affects our next rebirth. The thoughts that we can bring into our death are influenced by what we've done with this life. If we don't prepare throughout our life, there's no way we'll be prepared at our death. It's just not going to happen. Okay, so let's take our little break. It's about 7 minutes after or so. We're going to do just like a 10-minute break for people to stretch a little bit, use the restroom. If you have some food that people have brought in to share, if you'd like to have something to snack on. And then we'll reconvene. And again, maybe about 18 minutes after or so, I'll ring the bell about a minute before that and people can round up. And all right, so let me pause the recording for this. Recording again.
Thank you.
Okay, so what I want to do with the remaining time that we have is, because we've been kind of working with this idea of approaching death, kind of welcoming this topic into our practice, into our lives, There's this wonderful technique that's used in Tibetan Buddhism that comes from the teachings of Lama Tisha. Lama Tisha, of course, is the great Indian master who brought the Lam Rim tradition to Tibet 1,000 years ago. And as part of that, death and impermanence is one of the first meditations that we do after having recognized this perfect life that we have, this human existence, how rich it is with opportunity. And of course, having met with the teachings through the kindness of our gurus, all these amazing things, we have to recall death. We have to be mindful of death so that we do make the best use of this life. This meditation on death, death awareness meditation, I mentioned earlier, it's often called the 9-point death awareness meditation. I've already talked about remembering death is important. I don't think we need to revisit that. 9-point meditation on death is introduced generally in the Lam Rim, the Stages of the Path teachings, as I said, fairly close to the beginning. There are what are called these sort of 3 roots or 3 root contemplations that are about getting our heads around and coming to accept 3 basic things around death. The very first one that we're looking at tonight is the inevitability of death, the certainty of death. There was that title of that book by, it was about Jim Morrison. I don't remember who wrote it. No One Gets Out of Here Alive, I think it was called, right? This is the first topic. We have to really understand that there is an absolute guarantee that death is going to happen for me. That's the meditation, is to hit home in regard to each of us, the me, the I, that we are kind of in our continuum. This is going to happen to me. The second one is to look at the fact that the time of death is uncertain. As I mentioned this previously, this is the real kicker. This is the one that really helps us to spur on our practice, because it could happen anytime. It could happen today, it could happen tomorrow, it could happen anytime in the future. We have no guarantee as to when death will come, while it is for sure that death will happen. The third one is what is helpful at the time of death, to really, as I said earlier, look at those things that we tend to rely upon that provide us great support. That will be useless at the time of death. What will be most important at the time of death is what we've done with this life in terms of working on our minds. The degree to which we've cultivated more positive, healthy states and diminished those that are negative and unhelpful for us and for others. So the first of these, the first root, death is inevitable. Well, why do we need to meditate on this? I mean, if you ask anybody on the street, are you going to die? They'll say, of course I'm going to die, right? I don't think you can find anybody who's going to deny death. There is this person, I can't remember his last name, is it Brian Johnson or something? I read about it in the New York Times. This man is millionaire or billionaire or something. He's accumulated all this money through medical technology or something. And he has come up with this crazy plan. I call it a crazy plan. He doesn't think it's a crazy plan, to avoid death. He's investing $2 million of his own money every year, they say, to doing all of these things, really supplements and things that are, he thinks, going to keep him from having to experience death. He's putting all of his money. There's actually a website called don'tdie.com where people who are like-minded and think like him are going to hold this view of not dying. It kind of goes against the grain of what the Buddha taught, right? That everything is changing moment by moment and that there is gross impermanence, that death is going to happen. And my own question, and I'm not, this man could be a Buddha for all I know. He could be a very enlightened being, but what are you doing with your life while you're holding on to it and clinging to it in that way? Why we need to get this first one is so that we don't cling to this life so tightly every day, because we know that this life is going to come to an end. We live our lives as if death is inevitable. That's the whole kicker, again, of this part of it. And this first set of meditations is to really help us to have that knowledge and that kind of awareness every day of our lives, recognizing our own mortality. That these are the things we're going to have to face. There are within each of these 3 roots, the 3 roots that I just went through, the first one that we have here, death is inevitable, 3 more points for contemplation, for meditation. You also have a handout on this. I'll introduce you to that at the end here. It has more text that you can work with in guiding a meditation on this for yourself. The very first one, again, sounds like the whole point of this. Everyone has to die. They say that in doing this meditation, it is good to kind of think about beings of the past initially. These beings, go back historically. We've all studied history at one point in our education. Beings who were, great political leaders, great spiritual leaders, all these great scientists and people of the past. Has any one of them not had to die? Even Jesus Christ died, even the Buddha died, right? All of these beings who were here living life as vibrantly as what we are have had to die. And then they say the next kind of circle, that's kind of the bigger circle. Okay, all these beings out here who in the past who have died. Then we bring it into, what about those that I've known in this life who have died? We were talking over dinner tonight about when we first encountered death in our own lives. It's kind of another interesting way to explore death. Where was your first awareness of death? For many of us, it was grandparents, because grandparents are the ones that are closest to falling off the edge. They're further along than all of us are, right? And so, again, this is something to think about. The beings that you have known in this life who have died. Some of us have known more than others. There may be a rare person in here who's never known somebody who's died, but I think that's probably, again, fairly rare. The next point you go to is to think about those who are in your life right now who are going to die. Your loved ones, your pets, the people who you surround yourself with, family members, partners, children, all of those beings are going to die. Kind of tightening the circle so that you eventually arrive at the center of the circle, which is ourselves. And we get to that point and we say, and I too will die. Without a doubt, my death is going to come. Every one of us having that same condition of gross impermanence, of mortality. There's a nice little book that is on that supplementary book list I put together. I enjoyed reading this many years ago and have revisited it, called Living in the Light of Death by Larry Rosenberg, who's actually with the Insight Meditation Society. It's a great book because he does use Atisha's points on meditating, the 9 points, but he uses some interesting techniques for generating some awareness around this. The one that he uses in particular around this very first point is he said that there was a day when he was teaching on death awareness and what have you, and that night to kind of unwind, he turned on the TV. And he says, let's see, maybe I put it here. Oh, here it is. It was on the previous page. So he said, I'd just given this talk on death awareness, so it was on my mind afterward when I went up to my apartment to unwind. I love movies, especially old ones. That night, there was a film from 1938 with Clark Gable and Carole Lombard. And as a film buff, I had heard of everyone who was involved, the writer, the director, the producer. And suddenly I realized that everyone connected to that movie was dead. There they were, bounding around in the prime of life, wonderfully virile and sensual and attractive, and all of them were dead. The person who got the idea, the person who fleshed it out and wrote the screenplay, the person who wrote the score, everyone who played in the orchestra, probably even the people who sold the popcorn in the theaters were dead. It was stunning to realize the movie was so alive and they were so dead. So, I mean, you can bring this awareness. You don't have to make it into like, I'm going to sit down and meditate on these points with my legs crossed in a particular way and whatever. Just watch an old movie and bring to mind that reality that everyone, they're bounding around doing all these wonderful things, just like we do with our lives right now. Every one of them has had to die. Not a single person, again, gets out of here alive. And there are other ways to kind of engage in this contemplation. But the point is it really has to hit home that this is the reality for you. That's where the penny drops, as Venerable Rabina would say. This phrase comes from England. I'm not sure where it comes from, but anyway. Your lifespan is decreasing continuously. This is one that I find really, really quite insightful. And it's in this category of everyone has to die, because the idea is that when we begin to see the ramifications of that, we have to acknowledge that whenever our death is, again, next week we're going to talk about the uncertainty of that. We don't know where that is. Whenever it is, if it's tomorrow, if it's 20 years from now, if it's 5 years from now, we are always growing closer to it. Every single second we are growing closer to it. Lama Zopa Rinpoche encourages just watching, a timepiece. You could watch, I suppose, a digital clock or something. It's kind of more interesting to watch the old, timepieces with the second hand going around, right? Every second, one less second in this life, one less minute when that completes 60 seconds, one less hour when that completes 60 minutes. But it's also useful. Larry Rosenberg kind of focuses on the breath. We use the breath as a meditation object so much when we sit down to focus the mind, right? We try to kind of pay attention to that breath. Well, there's nothing stopping you from thinking as you're inhaling and exhaling, one last breath in this life, one breath closer to death. One last breath in this life, one breath closer to death. Again, there's many ways that you can even kind of use your imagination. One thing that I find useful, and we all saw The Wizard of Oz, right? There was that big hourglass where we're thinking about something that's maybe a lot larger than that. When you are conceived, essentially, that's when Buddhism says that kind of your life begins. There's so many grains of sand in the upper chamber, and they start going through to the bottom chamber, grain by grain. Every single second. You can't plug up the hole. Let's stop it for a while. Okay, can we stop for a bit so I can take a break from this? Every single second, a grain of sand is going from the upper chamber to the lower chamber. One less grain of sand that we will experience, that one less moment of life. They also use the analogy of like a train that is headed for its destination that never stops, right? And eventually we'll arrive at that destination. We're not, again, in this meditation, entertaining the idea of not being sure when that final grain of sand is or when you reach your destination. The idea is that we are actually trying to work with this concept of what the ramifications of knowing that death is a part of our life, what that means for us. It means that every moment we are getting closer to our death, regardless of when that's going to happen. And of course, it makes every moment quite precious then, right? Because every moment we decide to do something that is maybe not so useful for the time of death, maybe even more hazardous for a time of death because of all our clinging and grasping and holding on to things in this life, well, then that's one moment that we haven't really used well. And again, nobody's punishing us in all of this. It's our own minds looking at this and making a conscious decision then to use the moments that we have in a much more meaningful way within that understanding. So it already starts to point to the ramifications of spiritual practice being a key thing we're trying to get out of this meditation. The need for us to engage in spiritual practice and to really do what we can with the life that we have to make that our top priority. The third set of meditations, I'm sorry I had that up on the screen for those folks who were online, I had that up there a little bit longer than I needed to. The amount of time that you have for spiritual practice is actually really quite small. Now, what do we mean by spiritual practice? I alluded to it a little bit earlier. Spiritual practice in Buddhist terms. Yes, we often say, well, how much time do you meditate? How much time do you spend doing these? In Tibetan Buddhism, we have a lot of kind of deity practices and mantra recitations and sutra recitations and prostrations and all these kinds of things. But what are they all about? What is the core of spiritual practice? Doing two things. Increasing the positive states of mind, increasing our kindness, our compassion, our patience, our love, our wisdom, and decreasing and eventually eliminating the negative states of mind, the greed, the jealousy, the anger, the ignorance, all of these things that we want to get rid of. In fact, in Buddhism, when we talk about attaining that state of enlightenment, many of you have heard this before, the Tibetan word for Buddha is Sangye. Sang means to completely purify the mind, get rid of everything that is negative. And that's a conscious choice we make every day, that when we don't follow those minds of anger, we don't have that mind of greed or jealousy and so on. And we can eventually do that through deeper work in meditation. And Ye means to fully advance and develop all the positive qualities. So essentially, this is the work. Spiritual practice means working on your mind to diminish what is negative and to increase what is positive. So that third kind of point to think about isn't really like a reason why death is certain. It's within the understanding once more that death is certain. When it comes down to it, how much of your day do you really spend in dedicated spiritual practice? Which doesn't necessarily mean sitting on a cushion, because a lot of our day we're not on a cushion, right? It means, how are you working with your mind when you're in traffic and somebody cuts you off, or when you're at the store and somebody yells at you for God knows what reason, when you're just dealing with relatives and friends who you don't find so amenable, in terms of their who they are and what they say. To what degree are you working on your mind? So it's not always, again, just how much time in formal practice Formal practice is important. Spending time on the cushion is important. Meditating on, how we reduce our anger and jealousy and so on is important, and how we become more compassionate and loving and kind. But those have to play out in our everyday life. But oftentimes in this meditation, they encourage you to take a look at an ordinary day. So whatever an ordinary day looks like, how much time do you really think that you're engaging in spiritual practice during that day? Probably find that a lot of the time we're doing a lot of mundane things that we're really quite attached to doing, and that we end up, in a sense, wasting a lot of that time. I don't want to put a value judgment on it, but in Buddhist terms, we only have so many moments, right? There's only so many grains of sand that are going to descend down into that lower chamber before it's empty, before our death comes. Well, what are we doing with those? How are we making good use of that? So this one is really to help us to get to the conclusion. I'll put that on the screen next, these 3 points, by recognizing that everyone has to die, and this applies to me. My lifespan's continually decreasing. I'm getting closer and closer, moment by moment, to my death. Just being here together tonight, we've got, we're an hour and 45 minutes closer to our death. But the amount of time, that we have for spiritual practice in a day, in any of our days, is actually really quite small. The conclusion we come to is that since I'm definitely going to die, therefore I must practice Dharma. Dharma, again, being the term we give to the Buddhist teachings in general, but the Buddhist teachings are all about that work of diminishing what is negative, what is not fruitful and beneficial for us and others, and increasing those positive qualities that will really help us to advance on our spiritual path. So that's the kind of the conclusion we come to. With each of these, we're going to see. Next week, we'll go to the second set of 3, again, on the uncertainty of the time of death. And then in the third class, we'll go on to what will be helpful at the time of death. Everyone has kind of 3 points within it, and they are meant to drive you to a conclusion. And that's how I want you to work with this. Let me introduce you to that meditation. Again, it has a lot of more text to it. Meditation 2, handout number 2. Let me make this a bit larger, on the inevitability of death. You'll see again some initial comments about that, and it goes into each of these. Everyone has to die. And some, text that you can follow. Your lifespan is decreasing continuously. The amount of time you have for spiritual practice is very small. And then the conclusion and a dedication, kind of, thinking that through that time. And you can do these one at a time, and you can do them again in a variety of ways. You could do them, the first one, by watching a film from the 1930s, whatever it is that you want to do to kind of bring that point home.
To put them back into.
Okay, any final comments or questions before we do our dedication prayers and conclude tonight? How's everyone feeling with approaching death tonight in this first class and kind of getting our maybe more than our toe in the water?
Bring it on.
Bring it on. Okay. I think I'll consider that an open invitation then. But again, see what comes up for you as you approach this topic. Most of you, I think, have probably spent some time reflecting on it. So it's not going to be brand new, but nonetheless, can kind of be aware of how this is hitting home, how welcoming it is, or what have you. We have 2 Mary Jo questions. We have Mary Jo in the Gompa first, who put her hand up just a second ago, and then Mary Jo, who's online. So,
well, sometimes if I just spend too much time, it seems like I kind of get depressed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not, that diminishes my energy and my energy for investigation and so forth.
Good. And it's good to have that awareness and to know that, we don't want to push ourselves beyond what we feel comfortable with. And if we feel some charge from it and some, good things from it, that's great. If it starts to feel like it's a little too much and that maybe it is leading to a little more depression, then we can peel it back a little bit. The idea of this is to make us really feel, as I said earlier, to get to death and feel like we can die without fear. Maybe we can even die with some curiosity and anticipation. And maybe we can even be overjoyed and feel like kind of joyous that death is happening and have that. But that can be, again, a goal that we set for far in the future. It's not something we're going to have immediately from just, a few meditations on this topic. But yeah, it's good to be kind of observant, to do that mental observation. What is happening for me as I'm meditating on this topic, as I'm approaching this and getting my head around it. Yeah, Mary Jo Online, please, if you could.
Oh, I was just going to say, this is my absolute favorite topic. It energizes me. And, joyous effort is like that, I love this topic. That might be weird, but I love it.
I think it's a really interesting topic in that regard. I mean, just like what we saw when we looked at worst case scenarios, best case scenarios, people have different ideas of what that looks like. Death is one of those topics that will have different responses on the basis of kind of our own composition, what we bring to it, or what experiences we have. But I'm glad that you find it that way. But again, that's not the case for everybody. And we can, relish those things, those topics that really hit home for us and use them well. This is, again, at the very beginning of the long run, because it is often the sort of kick in the pants that helps us to really work with this topic and the reality of what we're facing and the spiritual path that we need to engage in on the basis of, again, the ramifications of this. If our lives went on forever, as we're going to see next week when we look at the topic of the uncertainty of the time of death, there are some human worlds, the Buddha says, in Buddhist cosmology, where you have really, really long lives. One of them you have 1,000 years guaranteed. Every human being born there is living for 1,000 years. I think, I don't even know, when would Social Security kick in? 650. You get to spend your last 350 years on, it's kind of joking, but the idea is that, with this human life, there's other factors that can be really kind of juicy to work with. And so if you find it engaging and something that you're putting out the welcome at, and I can't wait to sit down and do death awareness meditation, how wonderful. But again, not everybody's necessarily going to do that. But thanks for sharing that, Mary Jo. Yeah. We need to wrap things up. It's again right about 7:45. We do have the prayer list that went around, and so Jan is going to read the dedications that are on that list.
We dedicate the merit created by listening to this teaching to all beings everywhere on every prayer list. We dedicate for the health and long lives of all of our teachers, that they may continue to teach us and guide us. We dedicate for all those experiencing obstacles, specifically Matt V, Jana, Wyatt, and Adrian. For all those experiencing illness, specifically Lynn B, Amanda R, all those beings with hantavirus, and Kelly. We dedicate for all those experiencing who have died or who are currently dying, specifically those beings who have died due to war and violence, those who have died of hantavirus, Michael Lovato, Peggy Ness, Ted Winston, Kopi the dog, Lou DeSantis, Ray Handrick, Michael Tilson Thomas, Michelle Robinson, and Ben Eagle.
Any names need to be added? Yes, Mary Jo has.
Yes, I don't remember the names, but the 4 people that were killed in the medical transport plane in Capitan.
Yeah.
And also the people in the mosque at San Diego.
Yes.
Thank you.
So for those beings that we have mentioned, as well as others we're holding in our heart, we've been asked to pray for, we dedicate for removal of their suffering and for all conditions to be there for them to find true peace and happiness. Let's go ahead and do the prayers that we have to dedicate, and Jana will kindly lead us in those.
Dedication prayer, once in Tibetan. Gewadi da la sa be ru yer ne ro wa chi kya ma bu ba de ni sa John Joseph Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam Ke Yurche, Ke Wayam Pame Payam, Gong ne gong du sho. And long life prayers for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The wish granting, wish fulfilling, jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably high intense and Gyatso I beseech. May all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Prabhupadas of the Market of the Buddhas, victorious Losam, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite land, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this work here and now. Holding and spreading the many precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you will be armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to your made request, while striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the unending the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and great waves of bodhicitta of children of the victorious ones, may the smile of the reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples.
Great. Thank you, Jana, for leading us. Thank you all for being here tonight. So again, I'll see you all again next Sunday. Just so you know, I'm repeating the classes I'm doing in Santa Fe for the center there. So if you by chance want to come into the ones that are in Santa Fe for this course, it'll be Sunday mornings in Santa Fe. I'm just letting you know that so that, and why the center here has very kindly allowed me to do that this time rather than offering a fresh teaching up here, because I'm going to be on jury duty in Santa Fe over the summer months starting in just a few weeks. And I have no idea what to expect, whether I'll be tied up with that. And I just want to kind of minimize the amount of preparation time I need to do for these classes. So anyway, that's just a little something I thought I'd share with you. So anyway, I'll see you all next Thursday, hopefully. Have a good week thinking about death.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Laura, Mary Jo, everyone here. Bye-bye.
Appreciate